Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to our final class on Bayt al-Maqdis, concise history of the Holy Land, step by step Bayt al-Maqdis. Jazakumullah khair for attending and being on time. And this is our final class. And inshallah, as a follow-up, there will be a one-year diploma program if anyone would like to participate in that, and the details of that will be circulated, inshallah. And inshallah, before the end of the lecture, if you remind me, inshallah, I will share more information on that. Our discussion today will be the current occupation of the Holy Land and its roots. What we have been discussing in the last few weeks has been the history of Bayt al-Maqdis from the beginning, and we have went through from 10,000 years ago and how the history of Bayt al-Maqdis developed, and within the Quranic timeline that the Quran has given on the history of this particular land, that the Quran discusses more than any other land in the world, and the significance it does have. Last week we have discussed the Crusades, and the week before we discussed the connection of the Sahaba with Bayt al-Maqdis, and we got to the Crusade, and we saw how for centuries Bayt al-Maqdis was a hub. For the first time after the Muslim have controlled this land, it was a place of where multicultural, multi-religious society prospered, and an Islamic vision of inclusiveness, which we have discussed. And even with the Crusades that have taken place, and how Salah ad-Din was still faithful to the Muslim vision, that he didn't see Bayt al-Maqdis exclusively Muslim, but a place open for everyone. We discussed how the response to the Crusade and the example of Imam al-Harawi, Imam al-Sulami, and other scholars who were putting the main foundation for the liberation of Bayt al-Maqdis, and that gives us an important roadmap for the future. And we saw how Nur ad-Din Zinki, and before him his father Imad ad-Din, and later on Salah ad-Din Ayyubi have managed to liberate this land. We asked you to read an article, and the attendance form is on the screen. And for those who join later for the session, there will be a separate attendance form with questions from these sessions. So questions to make sure that you have attended the session, and based on that, inshallah, you will be able to get the certificate at the end of the course. And also remind me to mention to you the assignment that each one has to submit, a short assignment. I will discuss it at the end of the session, inshallah ta'ala. The article talked about how the Crusader mentality has continued, and even after the liberation of Salah ad-Din to al-Masjid al-Aqsa and to Bayt al-Maqdis, the kings of Europe came on the third crusade from Germany, from France, and from England, and they tried to take Bayt al-Maqdis back, and Salah ad-Din managed to defend it. However, Bayt al-Maqdis was lost twice during the reign of his nephews. The brother of Salah ad-Din al-Adil, his son, unfortunately handed over Bayt al-Maqdis to Frederick the second, who controlled Bayt al-Maqdis for 10 years. And however, he, living with Muslims in Sicily, he was trying to apply the inclusive idea of Islam, because part of the agreement that Al-Aqsa Mosque will be in Muslim hands. So this was not touched. And even during his visit to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, he saw a priest with a cross, and he got angry with him, and he had a bottle of wine and he threw him out of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Later on, after that period, Al-Aqsa and Bayt al-Maqdis were lost again and turned back. Al-Masjid al-Aqsa was turned back to a church for a short period before the last Ayyubid king managed to, Sultan managed to regain it back once, and for centuries it stayed in Muslim hands under the later on the Mamluks for 250 years, and then the Ottomans for 400 years until its occupation. However, every century there was an attempt to reoccupy Bayt al-Maqdis, and something that happened with the Third Crusade, Richard the Lionheart, as he was leaving the Holy Land, he said that actually the key to Bayt al-Maqdis is actually the Egypt. So occupying Egypt was extremely important for the crusade, and it became the focus of future crusades, like we see in the Seventh Crusade, where the target was Egypt, and then North Africa through Tunisia and North Africa to try to take Bayt al-Maqdis back. There was many attempts over the centuries to take Bayt al-Maqdis back, and the article details all of these examples. Alone in the 13th century, there was, in the 12th, 13th century, more than 35 attempts to try to take back the Holy Land from the Muslims. And it was during the Mamluks that managed to completely eradicate the Crusader presence in the region. But something quite interesting that happened is, and I suggest that you read the articles of Carol Denley, who discusses the Christopher Columbus, and his quest for Jerusalem. And she has an article and a book on this subject, where it was the main focal point of Christopher Columbus, and also in the article it details some of this. For him going west actually was in order to reach the Holy Land and take it back from the Muslims. And this is recorded in his own words, in his memoirs, where he discusses that the money, that the gold he's raising from the Americas, will be able to raise an army to take the Holy Land back from the Muslims. And he was in touch at that time. It was the Spanish Inquisition and the occupation of Al-Andalus, or what they call the Reconquista, taking back Al-Andalus back from the Muslims and throwing Muslims out. And this both Frederick and Ferdinando, and Isabella were also part of this scheme. And when Christopher Columbus died, all his money, he left his will to be used for the reoccupation of Bayt al-Maqdis. However, this was the rise of Protestantism in the West, and this took a different approach. And also at the same time, we're talking about the rise of the Ottomans, and the Ottomans were at the gates of Europe and went further all the way to Vienna. So the Crusades now were directed to stop the Muslim coming into Europe from the east, and this saw a shift. And with the rise of Protestantism, and particularly the Puritans, the discussion of the New Jerusalem, and this becomes today actually something part of the creed of Christian Zionists, who would like to, in order, even this was in the mind of Christopher Columbus. He was talking about the end of the world happening within a particular year, and that the return of the Messiah. And this later on becomes a focal point of evangelicalism, and particularly Christian Zionists, who well before Jewish Zionism were pushing the idea that the Jews need to be taken to Palestine for the return of the Messiah. But in between, we have the French Revolution and Napoleon, who comes and occupies Egypt in 1798. 1798, he comes to the Holy Land, to Bayt al-Maqdis, to Akka, and while he was there, he issues a proclamation in which he invites the Jews of Asia and Africa to gather under his flag in order to re-establish the ancient Jerusalem and to Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, to rebuild the temple for them. Although he was secular, he was using religion. Napoleon was a very clever individual, and he pushed, when he was in Egypt, he claimed that he's a Muslim and his name is Ali Bonaparte. So he says, what makes me different from the Ottomans? They're not Arabs, and I can rule you in the name of Islam. And when he gets to the Holy Land, he tries to win the Jews over, and he does this. He plays with religion the way he wishes in order to achieve his political gains. The Jews were not responding to his proclamation, although even later on he continued to push this idea forward with Jews in Europe. This was not very successful. However, he tried to push this idea, but it was the British that took this idea forward and took the religious dimension, particularly with Protestant evangelical Christians in the UK, to try to push this idea forward. Napoleon was defeated by Jazar Ahmed Ali Pasha at the shores of Acre, where before him Richard the Lionheart and even French monarchs and other European kings were also there. From that place, he is defeated and goes back to Egypt and then heads back to Europe. But Christian Zionists pushed this idea forward, and I will come back to them. But immediately after that, the Ottoman governor, Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt, rebels against the Ottomans, and he occupies Bilad al-Sham, all of historical Syria, including Palestine. And he, together with his son Ibrahim Pasha, they, in the short period, in the 10 years that they ruled Bayt al-Maqdis, made massive changes in the Holy Land. And Qawwali Mehmed Ali Pasha, for the first time in the city, Western consulates, particularly starting with the British, and the British, because the French had claim over the Catholics, the Russians over the Orthodox, and the British had no way of penetrating the Holy Land, so they claimed protection of religious groups, and they took protection of the Jews as something that they did. Although this goes back further back in history from the 17th century, but the actual changes took place during the time of Mehmed Ali, Qawwali Mehmed Ali Pasha, who did this during his time. And this is starting from going back to the early 1800s. As I told you, the British took on board some of the ideas that were being pushed, and they started now pushing these ideas forward. With the London Society for Promoting Christianity Amongst the Jews was established in the early 1800s, and the aim of this was to convert Jews to Christianity and to send them to Palestine. This project failed, because not many Jews actually accepted Christianity. So the project then moved towards moving the Jews toward Bayt al-Maqdis. And one of those who converted to Christianity was a Jewish rabbi. He becomes the bishop in Jerusalem, and he says only when the Egyptian forces under Mehmed Ali Pasha and under Ibrahim Pasha, his son, first entered Palestine, the permanent Protestant mission in Jerusalem proper could first be founded in 1833. There was no Protestant churches in this city, and he allowed the building of this. Not only that, he allowed the building of more than 9 synagogues in the city. Jewish prayer at the Al-Buraq wall, the western wall of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, previous to this time, was not something that was a norm. It becomes that, and even during the time of Ibrahim Pasha, there was suggestion to buy this from the Muslims, and the Muslims refused this. The establishment of the first foreign consulate in the city was the British consulate, and John Farren and Palmerston was at that time the foreign minister in England, and together with many people, the Campbell, who was the High Commissioner in Egypt, because now Egypt was under the British, and Moore and others. There was lots of discussions in the early 1830s, and eventually it was Christian Zionists, namely Shaftesbury, who was part of this Christian Zionist groups, who he was the son-in-law of Palmerston. So through the mother and daughter relationship and the intimate relationship with Palmerston, he was also a lord in the House of Lords. He was actually anti-Semitic, and this is quite interesting. He was against the emasculation of the Jews in the UK. The Jews were not allowed to vote, and Shaftesbury was against Jews having the right to vote in the UK. At the same time, he was pushing this idea forward that they need to be moved to Palestine. And Palmerston lobbied the Ottomans to allow this and to reform the Ottomans in that time. The idea that developed during this period, during the time of, there was lots of different schemes for the occupation of Palestine, lots of European schemes, and you will see the details of them in the paper. And the ideas that were being pushed forward were that Palestine needs to become a separate entity under some European power, and lots of the different European powers. So it was not to return to the Ottomans, it was to become a sort of semi-independent state under some European power. Eventually it returned to the Ottomans, and the Ottomans, when they returned in the early 1840s, they were faced with all these different consulates that they had to now become de facto. They could not close them, and this was part of the allowing the Ottomans to take Bayt al-Maqdis back. And many people were not happy with the Ottomans going back, particularly some European powers, because they had different plans, even having it as a Christian kingdom, and to try to re-establish that. However, under the Ottomans, for 400 years, for 300 years prior to that, Christians and Jews were living under what we call the millet system, which they were allowed to administer their own internal affairs within the frame of Islamic Sharia. So the Christians had their courts, the Jews had their courts, and they would go back, the High Court, the High Islamic Court, if there's something that was undecided in these courts, it would go back to the Islamic court. So the Ottoman archive shows us, and some of Jewish academics have done extensive work on the Ottoman archive, and it shows what? It shows actually that the Jewish women would go to the Jewish court, and if the rabbi would not give them their right, they would threaten them to go to the Islamic court to get their Jewish rights. This is how inclusive the Ottomans were. Jewish prayer at the Barak wall happened at the end of the Ottoman period, particularly after the time of Muhammad Ali Pasha, and the turning point, which we will be discussing, is the end of the Ottoman rule, the start of the British occupation, or what they call the British Mandate, Jordanian rule, and the Zionist occupation. During a very important point in the history is the time of Sultan Abdul Hamid, and we will come back to this. But this, what started with the French Revolution and the rise of nationalism was to have a major effect on the region. The French Revolution and the idea of nation states were now being presented to the Muslims and to different groups as their future. And this invisible carrot, this thing that was being presented to them, becomes the thing that Muslims today, unfortunately, live and die for states that were drawn on a map by colonial powers, and they have to accept many of this. And we will come back to this important point again. As we see, foreign interest in Bayt al-Maqdis has never stopped since the Crusade, and it continued throughout the centuries, but now it has shifted, and Bayt al-Maqdis is now the focus, particularly, and we see this throughout the centuries from Columbus to the 17th, 18th, and now into the 19th century. And we see that the Crusade is now taking a new dimension and a new position in this issue. And we see this with the British establishing their consulate, and the role of the consul was the protection of the Jews, although there was no direct connection between the British and the Jews. But in order to create this, an English consular agent in Jerusalem, as Palmerston says, becomes a necessity. And Muhammad Ali Pasha and the different instructions that were done in order to procure a firman from the Sultan on this issue. And we see this, that the idea was to develop now a buffer state, that the aim of which will be to control the heart of the Muslim course. And the British were constantly pushing this through their ambassador or consul in Istanbul to try to push some of these ideas forward. This concept of a Jewish buffer state we see in the work of in the writings of Shaftesbury in the 1830s, the end of the 1830s, and he appeals to Palmerston, who later becomes the Prime Minister of England, that the idea of an Anglicized Jewish colony in Palestine, strongly sympathetic to British interest, and dependent on British aid, and under its protection, obviously, grew in appeal as a result of subsequent historical development. Some people were pushing this in Britain as a religious matter, in order for the second coming of the Messiah, and others were pushing this idea as something else, as in British interest, in order to control the trade routes with India. So you see this being pushed, and you see this in the British media in the 1800s being pushed in these two directions. One appealing to politicians and politics, and the second appealing to the religious dimension. And the idea of a Jewish client state to the British. So the Jews were to be used as a pawn in the hands of the British. And this is very dangerous. And if you see today, actually, what is happening is the Jews are used for Western interests. And you see this being reiterated by Netanyahu and even other prime ministers, that they are an outpost of Western democracy and the West in that region. But you see this in the quotations that you see here in front of you, particularly the Crimean War, which started between great powers in the 1850s. The reason for this was fighting over religious rights in Jerusalem, and this the Ottomans were trying to play both the French and the Russians in this, and this caused the start of the Crimean Wars because of what was happening in Bayt al-Maqdis in Jerusalem, and this becomes a very important milestone in the history of the city and the region. As Clayton puts it, was to ensure a British presence in a strategically vital area. So now, using the Jews in Palestine and the Jews that will be moved to Palestine will ensure a British presence in that area, while the others were pushing off the idea of a Jewish client state that would constitute a key link in Middle Eastern chain. And the term Middle East is very problematic, as we have discussed in our first class. But as many academics have argued in this, it was also for colonial interests in India. A Jewish client state in Palestine was increasingly seen as a vital to British colonial interest, particularly in India and particularly the trade routes. Thomas Clark in 1860s, in a book written India and Palestine, or the restoration of the Jews, viewed in relation to the nearest route to India. So all of this was now being pushed in that dimension. The Jerusalem question, internationalization of Jerusalem as a project was now being pushed by a lot of these powers from the early 1830s, and pushing the idea of allowing non-Ottoman citizens to own land with a political drive for religious and cultural dimensions. And what we see here emerging, this was by the British consul in Damascus, Charles Henry Churchill, who wrote to Moses Haim, who was the Jewish leader in the UK, and pushing him. And the Jews were not interested in this idea, but he was really pushing that you need to push this idea forward and unite the Jews around this idea of a Jewish national home. And the Jews until now were not buying into this idea. This is in the 1840s, in the 1860s, 50s, and even 70s. And it took until the 1890s until the Jewish nationalism started to develop out of this. But the British government were pushing the Ottomans, and we see this in a letter from Palmerston to to his ambassador in Istanbul, to lobby the Ottomans to allow Jews to come to Palestine, and the creation of something under the Ottomans, so not independent from the Ottomans. This is what was being pushed forward, but in reality, it was to be under British control. Now we come to the rise of Jewish nationalism and what became Jewish Zionism. And what you see is 100 years before Jewish nationalism or Jewish Zionism, we have Christian Zionism pushing these ideas forward in all these different circles amongst the Jews, and the Jews were not that interested in this issue until Theodor Herzl comes into the scene. Excuse me. With Theodor Herzl, who establishes the first Jewish Zionist Congress, or the Zionist Congress, in Basel in 1897. So you can see we've discussed 100 years of Christian Zionism, and now 100 years later we have, and even before that, the suggestion of Napoleon following the French Revolution, pushing this idea forward, and the Jews were not interested. Actually, the Jews were quite happy living under the Ottomans. The Ottomans gave them a safe haven when the Jews were thrown out of Spain and were being persecuted, and they were welcomed in Ottoman lands, across the whole of Ottoman lands. And the majority of them settled in different areas. They could have settled in Bayt al-Maqdis in Palestine and Jerusalem, but they decided not to. Very few of them actually settled there. They were not interested in this idea. This idea was not something in Jewish mind until Jewish nationalism started with, before Theodor Herzl it did start. However, it did not, the fruits of it were only seen during the time of Theodor Herzl, who started gathering the Jews around this idea of creating a home for the Jews. And he was secular, and he was not interested in Palestine per se. So there were suggestions to have in Uganda, to have a Jewish state in Uganda, or in Americas, or in the Southern Americas, or in different places. And they were happy with these suggestions, but the Jews would not, the Jews would not gather around this idea unless they managed to get something that has a connection with them, which was Palestine. So using Palestine was something that would use religion and gather the Jews around this idea. Herzl met with Sultan Abdul Hamid. He went to Istanbul. He tried to meet with him many times, and he suggested the idea. And after long discussions and after the different schemes, eventually the offer that was offered to the Ottoman state, which was in debt, millions in debt, suggestion was to consolidate the Ottoman debt in exchange for a charter allowing Zionists and Jews to access to Palestine, and also giving a massive bribe to the Ottoman Khalif, Sultan Abdul Hamid. And the response of Sultan Abdul Hamid was rejecting this idea, and his statement on this is very, very clear, that this land does not belong to him, it belongs to all the Muslims, and this land was not to be given up and over his dead body. So he was very adamant on this, and we'll come to his last letter in which he explains that he was dethroned because of Bayt al-Maqdis, because of the Holy Land, because of not giving Palestine as a land for the Jews and to Zionists. In this, we see the British coming on board with three different schemes. And the British were very cunning. The British made three promises, promising Palestine thrice. And we have the Balfour Declaration, we have the Hussein McMahon the promise to Sharif Hussein, and we have the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So Palestine was being offered to three different people at the same time. And what we see with now the British are manipulating the concept of nationalism. They managed to succeed with the Jews, and now they are succeeding with the Arabs. Sharif Hussein, who was the Ottoman governor of Hijaz, Mecca and Medina, and who lived actually for a long time in Istanbul, and under Sultan Abdul Hamid. And when Sultan Abdul Hamid was dethroned, and the project of Islamic unity, of bringing all the Muslims under one banner, which Sultan Abdul Hamid lived for, the concept of Ittihad al-Islam, uniting the Muslims, and he would appoint the Mufti of British Muslims, and he would be following the news of the Muslims in Indonesia, in Thailand, across the whole of the Muslim world. When he was building the Hijaz Railway, money was coming from across. This was a project of Muslims. Money was coming across from India, from across the whole of the Muslim world for this particular project, as we have seen. Now coming back to the British managed to actually, and also the French, was just not the British, Turkish nationalism and Arab nationalism actually started in France. The first meeting of the young Turks and the young Arabs was taking place in France, in Paris, and returning to Damascus and pushing this idea forward. The son of Sharif Hussein, Faisal, became part of the Arab nationalist movement, and he suggests to the British that we will fight alongside you. This is in 1913, 1914. We will fight alongside you if you help us create an Arab kingdom. And at that time, the British High Commissioner in Egypt, he said, we are not interested in this offer at the moment. And when the Ottomans entered World War I, the British then took this project forward and engaged with his father, Sharif Hussein, suggesting to him, and this is a cabinet document stating that Palestine would be included in the pledge by the British to the Arabs. And you can see the map here to the left, the whole of Arabia. What was being discussed in this letter is quite interesting. And you can see, if I zoom in, the memorandum to the British commitments to Hussein, and talking about Palestine and the Waqf and the holy places and so on. And you can see in the map most of Syria, except for the northern part and the western part where Lebanon is. But Palestine was definitely included in the commitment of the British to King Hussein. So Palestine is offered here to Sharif Hussein that this will be part of his kingdom. What was not being discussed is Lebanon and northern Syria. This was in, let's go back, see the date on this. This was starting from 1914 till 1917, the discussions in this. At the same time, the British and the French had an agreement. Actually, the Russians and others were part of this agreement initially, and later on it was just that it became known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Mark Sykes and George Picot, the French and the British were dividing the cake, and you see here A, B, and Palestine was to be left under international administration. So Palestine is going to be under international administration, and you can see the map showing this. And this is the grave of Sykes, and you can see what is interesting is that he's being represented as a crusader, and you can see if we zoom in here that underneath his feet you have the Muslim Ottomans, and this is still the way these pictures were taken by the late Mohsen Jack Kilby, who last 2 years ago passed away. He was one of the founders of Islamic Jerusalem studies. He accepted Islam together at the same time with Yusuf Islam, and he was his photographer as a singer before they both become Muslim. And you can see here in the image the Muslims being crushed underneath his feet, and you can see the depiction of this crusader mentality still living on. And you can see it even on the image here to the right, together with the sword and the crosses over it. So that was the second promise, to divide the land. So the first was to give it to Sharif Hussein and the Arabs. The second is to make it into international, under international administration between the French and the British. And you can see it here. Not all of Palestine and the boundaries of Palestine were not set until after that. And the third was the Balfour Declaration. And you see the Balfour Declaration was issued in 1917, offering Palestine to be a home for the Jewish people. What is interesting is, until now, Jews have not bought into the idea. And the only Jew in the cabinet, in the British cabinet, Edwin Montague, believed that the Balfour Declaration was anti-Semitic, and it provided an excuse for European countries, including Britain, to pack their Jewish citizens off to Palestine. So this is how it was seen, and he was adamantly against it. And the Balfour Declaration had to be rewritten a few times for this to be presented in the name of the Foreign Office by Balfour. But this was not just a British thing. 6 months earlier to that, the French also promised Palestine to the Jews. And before Balfour Declaration was issued, other European countries and even the United States and the President of the United States were in support of this, including the Pope and the Italian government. So it's quite interesting that the Balfour Declaration was not just was not just a British thing, but it was something that was presented, and there was consensus on it across the board. Although it is the text of the letters quite short. However, you read His Majesty's government after considering the aims of the Zionist organizations, and these are the drafts, accepts in principle to recognizing Palestine. And this was given to the head of the Zionists in the United Kingdom. But you can see here in the text, in the drafts, Palestine as a national home of the Jewish people, and the right of Jewish people to build up its national life in Palestine under the protection to be established at the conclusion of the peace following the successful issue of the war. His Majesty's government regards essential for the realization of the principle to grant of internal autonomy to Jewish nationality in Palestine, freedom of immigration for Jews, and the establishment of a national colonizing corporation for the resettlement of economic development in the country. The conditions and the forms are, you can see, and the draft, you can see in the draft that you see here, His Majesty government accepts in principle that it becomes the national home of the Jewish people. This is another draft. Endeavors to secure the achievement of this objective, and will discuss the necessary method and means with the Zionist organization. Finally, this was the final text from the Foreign Office on the 2nd of November 1917. Balfour writes, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government. It was for a long time until the death of the Queen. It was Her Majesty's government, but now it is back to His Majesty's government. The following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspiration, which has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. These are the exact words that were finally presented. His Majesty's government's views, 119 words. With favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and pushing this by the by Edwin Montague that the other religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, does not mean Christians or Muslims, non-Jewish shall be observed or protected. You can see how this playing with the concept of nationalism in people's minds, putting this idea of a nation state in the minds of the Arabs, in the minds of the Turks, in the minds of the Jews. Now this is to be achieved, and the British are able to divide the Muslim world, split it up together with the French and others, split up the unity that united the Muslims across the board, with borders that were drawn in blood, not just over the sand, but in blood. The British issuing the Balfour Declaration in November were already in preparation for the occupation of Palestine in December. They pushed through Egypt, and the army of the British was supported on the right-hand side by Sharif Hussein and his son Faisal. And in the British army occupying Bayt al-Maqdis, you can see not just British. The British were, yes, they were the commanders, but you can see Indian Muslims and Indian soldiers and French soldiers are part of the army that occupied the land. And you can see here what is quite interesting is the way this memory of the crusade was being re brought around it. You can see here from the Australian War memorial, you can see how a soldier is shaking the hand of a crusader, and you'll see this across the board. Christians and Jews in Islamic Jerusalem and Bayt al-Maqdis, as I mentioned, were living under Islamic law. Conflicts amongst Christian communities over holy places were to be resolved by the Ottomans. The keys of the church, the status quo was to be maintained. And this word, the status quo, is today important in the occupation of the Bayt al-Maqdis and the future of the Masjid al-Aqsa al-Mubarak. Muslims took care of the Jews and the Christians and treated them justly. As I mentioned earlier, if a Jewish woman did not get her right from a Jewish rabbi, then she will take him to a Muslim high court. So immediately he would adopt a more flexible position on financial and personal matters. The British occupation of Egypt and led to the first Jewish waves of immigration or migration into Palestine in the late 1800s. At the end of the 19th century, we see this becoming now a fact. And with the British occupation and the Balfour Declaration, this has become becoming more possible in that. The British occupation, and it's not just a mandate, they call it the British Mandate, was initially a military administration under the name of the Western Administration of Occupied Enemies' Land, meaning the Ottomans here. In July 1920, a civil administration replaced the military administration. And just before we come to that, let's just look at the image here with Allenby coming in the city and declaring the end of the crusade. He declares that this is the end of the crusade. So you can see, although the British tried to push, the British government said we should not use crusader rhetoric because this we have in the army, we have Muslims, Egyptians and Indians, and also the Arabs. We should not use such rhetoric. However, Allenby in his occupation speech actually announced this to be the case. In 1920, when it became a civil administration, the first administration was led, the first High Commissioner was a Jew and a Zionist, a British Jew and a Zionist, Herbert Samuel. And he created different laws that and regulations that allowed for a stronger Zionist and British presence in that. Chaim Weizmann came and visited Samuel, and in his speech, Samuel actually organized a meeting between Weizmann and Arab nationalist leaders. During Samuel's time, the architect of Alexandria came to Jerusalem and restructured the city and divided the city into 4 different areas. The walled city, areas around the walled city, no building was allowed. The eastern Jerusalem, so now we have a division of Jerusalem into eastern and western Jerusalem, building with restrictions. And Western Jerusalem was a developed area and allowed building, and this becomes the hub of Jews in the city. Excuse me. The British established a new constitution for Palestine, mandate established by and accepted by the League of Nations at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, and it included part of the Balfour Declaration, allowing Jews in that. The British occupation of Palestine is the worst of the occupation. This is the start of the real Nakba of the occupation of Palestine, appointing a Zionist, a Jew, to be the first High Commissioner. He used to support the Jews politically through giving them lots of political and administrative power, raising number of Jewish employees in the administration, the British administration, creating many Jewish Zionist organizations, such as the Jewish Agency, supported them militarily by overseeing the establishment of military units such as the Haganah, which becomes later on a threat to the British, and later on becomes the Israeli occupation forces, or what they call the IDF. The numbers of Jews started to increase during the British occupation from 8.3% in 1919 to 31% in May 1948. So you can see the rise in Jews in Palestine and the many factors that have led to this, including the Holocaust in Europe, and that was the and many documents have shown even Zionists in alliance with Hitler to move the Jews to Palestine. However, during this British occupation, right from the beginning, land was given also free of charge for Zionists. 200,000 or 300,000 square meters of fertile land was given free of charge to Zionists on the coastal area, and then another 200,000 was given with minimal rent to the British, giving them 500,000 dunum of land, 500,000 square meters to start creating what they call the kibbutz and so on. Although what happened initially, and this is a problem in nationalism, is, and let me go back to a picture that is very disturbing. You see the image here, and you can see some of the Muslims are clapping, welcoming Allenby as he comes into the city. You might tell me the Muslims were happy. Unfortunately, yes. And they welcomed them with open arms. You might say this is impossible. How is that? How can that be possible? When we talked in the first lesson, in the first seminar, of the occupation of the mind, the occupation of the mind is way worse than the occupation of the land. You start thinking, and this is at the time when Arab nationalism was at peak, also Turkish nationalism. Before the occupation of the British, the Turks had already, after the dethroning of Sultan Abdul Hamid, who lost his throne because of Bayt al-Maqdis. He says in a letter he writes to his Sheikh Abu Shamat that the reason that he was dethroned is he would not give Palestine as a Jewish homeland. He writes this clearly. And the Turkish nationalists, Ittihad and Taraqi, and the Young Turks take over, and they allow Jewish migration immediately into Palestine. Not only that, they Turkify, everything becomes Turkified. Even the governor in Jerusalem would not be able to communicate with the people because he would not be able to communicate with them like at the Sultan Abdul Hamid's time in their language, in Arabic. Now everything has to become in Turkish, and this created descendant against the Turks, and this is why the people saw the British as their savior. And if I would read you some of the very disturbing events that took place at that time, with the Mufti of Jerusalem coming to welcome Allenby. Not only that, but when he hears of the crusade in his speech, he walks out and he's upset. But then he comes back to Allenby and welcomes him and congratulates him on the occupation of Palestine and the complete occupation of that land. Not only this, as I told you, Samuel managed to get meetings with the Zionists, and the Zionists explained that we're not here to take your land, we're here to live together, and so on and so forth. And the Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Kamil al-Husseini, puts the foundation stone together with one of the priests of the city of the Hebrew University. This is the occupation of the mind. This is you have scholars coming, not local people, but even scholars coming and writing poetry, even saying the entry of Allenby into the city. You'll be very disturbed by a scholar from Al-Azhar. He says that the entry of Allenby into the city is only comparable to the entry of Umar ibn al-Khattab. This is how low Muslim scholars at that time were going. The occupation of the mind was the worst. When you think, as one of the authors at that time says, the enemy becomes your friend and your brother becomes your enemy. And you read this in the works of Lawrence of Arabia, and the spy, the British spy. Excuse me. I'm sorry. The last few days, I think I've had the cold. My apologies. And seeing this, and that your enemy becomes your savior and your brothers become your enemy. And Lawrence says that we need to revert Hajj from going to Mecca to go to Damascus, from going from the ideal of religion to the ideal of this nation, state, or nationality, or nationalism, sorry, nationalism. And they succeeded, unfortunately, in buying over many of these Arabs to their side. And not all the Arabs, by the way, because the majority of the Arabs were still fighting alongside the Ottomans. And the British would fly over Ottoman camps and throw letters from Sharif Hussein and from the British saying that they're coming here to save them from Ottoman oppression, from Turkish occupation, and they're coming here to re-establish everything. And this is why people, unfortunately, welcome them, clapping and welcoming them into the city the way they have done. What happened after that is when people started waking up from being this in this state of drunkenness and their mind occupied, and when they saw the British were not coming here, and you see actually a similarity of this to the occupation of Iraq, when Iraqis were welcoming unfortunately the Western occupiers, the Americans and the British, and the others occupying their land and clapping. All these Iraqis are now crying blood because of the democracy that the West brought to 2 million dead Iraqis. 2 million Iraqis were killed in the process of bringing them so-called democracy. Something happened similar 100 years ago in a very different, in a very similar light, unfortunately. When people started, actually, this started immediately. People were going to the British camp, army camps, giving them gifts and so on. But the British were after, the British soldiers were after two things. And when people started seeing this, they started getting disgusted by the British soldiers. They wanted booze, alcohol, and they wanted women. And people were upset with this, and they were not happy with this. And this was being provided to them by the Zionists and the Jews uh, for them. And there was a documentary or series on Channel 4 in the UK that covered the Promised Land, I think it was called, and it covered parts of this, how Jews and Zionists were working against the British in this. Uh, the start of the uprising, including the younger brother of the Mufti, Hajj Amin Husseini, who later becomes a Mufti, but before he becomes a Mufti, actually, he unfortunately he is buying into this Arab nationalism idea. He recruits thousands of people to fight alongside the British. The destruction of the Hijaz railways and other things are many of the things, and the British saw him as a friend until he becomes the Mufti and he sees the British what they're doing, and then he starts leading some of the revolutions against the British. However, he was still close to them in a way or another. But in the early 1920s, there was clashes against the occupation, the British occupation, where four Muslims were killed, nine Jews were killed, and the British tried to prevent the Arabs from leaving their homes and issued a curfew and stopped many of the newspapers. Then Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa becomes the focus of this. This was at Nabi Musa in the month of April, but then Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and Al-Buraq wall becomes the focal of the conflict. Jews come to Al-Buraq wall and start saying the wall is ours, and they start talking about the temple. And this in August 1929, when they tried to take over Al-Buraq wall. The next day was the anniversary of the Mawlid al-Nabi. The Muslims, after the Friday prayers, go down to Al-Buraq wall and have a massive demonstration, and then starts clashing with them, and the British side by the side of the Jews, and hundreds are killed in the process. The agreement that was taken that no negotiations, no contract, and asking for the dissolution of the mandate. However, the one that was leading the revolution, the Islamic dimension of it, was Sheikh Izzuddin al-Qassam. And Sheikh Izzuddin al-Qassam, he was actually from Syria after the new divisions of the new identities, but he did not see Palestine is separate from his land. He fought against the French in Syria and then decided that the Masjid al-Aqsa and Bayt al-Maqdis is the focal. If we lose it, then we lose everything. So he continues against the Zionists and the British. And Sheikh Izzuddin al-Qassam, as the Imam of the Haifa Istiqlal Mosque, fights and leads the revolution, and his killing, his martyrdom, in 1936 starts the 1936 revolution. Actually, what is interesting, he was against the Palestinian elite who were pushing for the idea of negotiating with the British to try to gain our rights. And he said, you cannot negotiate with them. There was an earthquake that took place in the city, in the holy city, that caused a lot of damage to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. If you were in the position Let me hear your ideas. There is an earthquake, damage to Al Masjid Al Aqsa takes place. Which is a priority, to fight the occupation and the Zionist plans and the colonialist British plans, or to renovate Al Masjid Al Aqsa and to restore it? What would you uh, have done? Until I see your answers, I'll drink another glass of water. Okay, getting some answers. Mahmoud or Muhammad Wahid says fight the occupation. Okay, fight the occupation. Zainab is also saying. Uh, the question was, would you fight? Now there's an earthquake in Masjid al-Aqsa, and this happened in the 1920s. Fight the occupation with that money, or spend the money on restoring the damaged Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Uh, Mushtaq says renovate, and this was the opinion of Hajj Amin al-Husseini, to renovate the Masjid al-Aqsa. Ismail Baba, this was the opinion of Sheikh Azzuddin Qassan and Farheen, and the others continue fighting, fight the occupation. This was the opinion of Sheikh Azzuddin Qassan. We have to fight the occupation, not what you're suggesting to do both. Sheikh Azzuddin Qassan said, what would benefit us in beautifying the mosque, restoring the mosque, if we would lose the land? This money, instead of being used for renovating mosque, we should use this money for fighting and liberating this land. You cannot do both. This is what Sheikh Azzuddin Qassan was trying to do. Hajj Amin al-Husseini was saying otherwise. He was saying, no, we need to raise the money, restore the mosque. And he started asking different Muslim rulers to send money for the restoration of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Allenby suggested to him, and he said to him, listen, I will put an advert in the Times newspaper in London, and I will raise this money within a few days for you. Hajj Amin Hussein said, no, this money needs to come from the Muslims, so thank you for your offer, but no, thank you. The money eventually came from different rulers that were supported by the British, particularly Abdullah, the son of Sharif Hussein. By the way, Sharif Hussein, when he started asking for what the British had offered him before, during the discussion, they said to him, he said, we need to re-establish the Khilafah. And I spent a week in the British archive, and I got physically sick at reading the letters between Sharif Hussein and even seeing the original Sykes-Picot map and so on. But one of the letters, they said, the Turks are not the legitimate caliphs, because Khilafah should be in Quraysh, and you are the rightful owner of the Khilafah. You come from the garden of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ya Sahib al-Dawhat al-Muhammadiyya, or the one coming from the blessed tree of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You have the right to be the Khalif. And they bring the text that I read is shocking. It was written by a faqih, someone who understands Islamic fiqh very well, and it says, from the first Khalif Abu Bakr as-Siddiq all the way to the last Abbasid Khalif, all of them were from Quraysh, all of them were Arabs, and the Islamic ruling is that the Khalifa needs to be an Arab, and these Turks are not legitimate Khalif, and you should be the Khalif. When he starts asking for the Khilafah, they expel him, and what is the worst is what happens next. If someone spits in the face of your father, would you still shake hands with that person and sit with them? That's exactly what the sons of Sharif Hussein did. They continued to deal with the occupation, with the British, and the British had appointed by their sides, advisors, not advisors. Actually, they're the ones setting the ground. All of you have heard of Lawrence of Arabia, but above his payroll was a woman. She was the one that created most of the identities today in the Muslim world. This woman, her name was Gertrude Bell. If you have not heard of her, Hollywood film was done about her life called The Queen of the Desert. It portrays her as an incredible woman. But she, Faisal, the son of Hussein, would not take a decision without her permission. She was the maker of kings, and you see at the crowning of many of these kings, her presence is there, and she stayed by their side, and she continued to do this. But coming back to the renovation of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, Allenby suggested that it raise the money, and Sheikh Hussein, not Sheikh Hussein, Hajj Amin Hussein said no, the money needs to come from the Muslims, and the money eventually came. Majority of the money came from Abdullah, the son of Sharif Hussein, who all of his budget actually comes from the British. So the British paid for the renovation of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in a twisted way. What happens next is the revolution takes place in 1936, and there's a general strike. Everyone is standing against the British, and the British need to end this general strike. How would they end it? They would use their Arab puppets, the Arab leaders, to do this. They used the Saudis, they used the King of Jordan. He was not even the King of Jordan, he was the Emir of Jordan, because it was by when Churchill, together with Gertrude Bell, and in their presence was also Lawrence of Arabia. In 1921, they met in Egypt, and with one signature, Churchill creates a new identity, a new state, and he calls it the Emirate of Eastern Jordan. And that later on becomes the kingdom of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. But it was decided, and you see the map of Jordan today has been drawn with a ruler. This is when you create the identity and people live for this identity, and this is the identity they know, unfortunately, today. There is lots to discuss here, and I'm skipping a lot, and please keep your questions until the end, where we will deal with them, because I cannot read the questions as we're going along, because there's a lot to cover until the modern period today. The Arab leaders intervene, and they say, we are going to make sure that the British hold their word, and please end the general strike, and we will make sure that the British will keep their word. Obviously, unfortunately, the general strike ended with the intervention of the Saudis and other Arab leaders, and eventually what happens next, you see how it unfolded, particularly after World War II, the rise of Jewish immigration into Palestine went very strong. But now we come to 1948 and 1947, and how did the occupation of Bayt al-Maqdis and Palestine take place? Now today, the boundaries of Palestine, or Mandate Palestine, is the British Palestine. So when we see this map that we will look at now, what happens is the destruction of 530 villages and cities takes place in 1947 to 1949. And you can see here in the map that you can see here the way that these cities were ethnically cleansed. Military assaults over 270 localities, 51% of what later becomes Israel was ethnically cleansed at gunpoint. So, two out of the 530 villages and cities, 270 of them were evicted. You can see the map in front of you. The blue dots are the ones evicted by that. 23%, 122 localities were expelled by Jewish forces. So they would go in and expel the population. People, 9% on the fall of neighboring localities, fearing for their lives, they escaped to nearby places, waiting to go back. Psychological warfare, 50 localities that were going to come and murder your women, children, and kill everything like they did in Deir Yassin. And the Israeli archive recently exposed many of these places that were actually through military assaults and massacres have taken place. 1% or less, 5 localities. The Arab generals who were to be liberating Palestine, under whose command? Under the command of a British general. His name was Glob Basha. And on the ground, the general that was leading the defense, or so-called defense, whose name was Norman Shaw, another British general. So they were the ones, they asked 5 localities to withdraw, and they will return them back. And some we are unaware of. And you can read more on this in the works of Salman Abu Sitta and Benny Morris. So you can see 83% actually were ethnically cleansed directly by killing and forcing people out of their places. So you can see how things evolved and how 80%, 78% of British Palestine was now under occupation through these different means, starting with the occupation 1967, 1917 till 1947 to 48, and how all this land was occupied and how it moves beyond that. The British argument and the Zionist argument that was being pushed forward at the beginning is that this was a land without a people, for a people without a land. This goes back to Christian Zionists in the 1840s, 1850s. Lord Shaftesbury saying a country without a nation is in need of a nation without a country. Is there such a thing? To be sure that there is the ancient and rightful lords of the soil, the Jews. And even in the early 20th century, Palestine is a country without a people, and the Jews are a people without a country. And when they came to Palestine, this propaganda was used to get the Jews into Palestine. And when they came, now there are people here. So now there is a country which happens to be called Palestine, a country without a people. Our intention is to finally establish such a society in Palestine that Palestine shall be as Jewish as England is English or America is American. And you know what that actually means. America is not really American because also the people there were ethnically cleansed. This is said in the early 1900s and 1930s by the chairman of the Jewish National Fund. Haim Weizmann says, if there are other inhabitants there, they must be transferred to some other place. So now when they move the people there, now there are others living in this area. We must take over the land. We must have greater and nobler ideal than preserving several 100,000 of Arab fallahin, Arab villagers. This is what was being happening. This is how the Nakba in 1948 took place. Cities like Jaffa, other places, you can see in 1948, the population, 70,000 Palestinians, 30,000 Jews, 19 schools, over 11,000 students, 12 mosques, 10 churches, 4 hospitals, and 7 daily newspapers. This is from 1946. And you can see how two-thirds of Palestine, which was rural, people living in villages, most of them were expelled out of their villages and ethnically cleansed. And there is a lot. This is an extract from the text of Plan D directly. This is the order to the Zionist soldiers and militias. In the conquest of villages in your area, you will determine whether to cleanse or destroy them in consultation with your Arab affair advisor. And you are permitted to restrict insofar as you are able cleansing, conquest, and destruction operation of enemy villages in your area. It was very clear, the text of the ethnic cleansing, as we have shown how most of this was 78% of Palestine was, or British Palestine was ethnically cleansed. The second step was to prevent the return of Palestinians to their villages, because Arab armies were meant to preserve what was then the United Nations 1947 partition plan, which 45% will be to the Palestinians and 55 to the Jews, which was rejected by the Jews and the Arabs. However, what was left for the Arabs was just over 20%, and the rest taken by the Zionists. And in 1948, this is a protocol of a meeting, Golda Meir, making sure that they will not go back to Acre or Nazareth. They should not go back to these places. Destruction of the villages during the military operation to stop the Arabs going back, prevention and the cultivation of the land, settlement of Jews in these villages, and legislation and propaganda on this. The military assault, you can see here, this is from a British intelligence officer, again talking about during the morning, the Jews were continually shooting down all the Arabs who moved in the old city of Wadi Nisnas. They included completely indiscriminate machine gun fire, mortar, sniping women and children. This is what took place. This is how Palestine was occupied. And they tell you Palestinians sold their land. You know, this is the second propaganda. The first propaganda is that there's a land without a people for a people without a land. And then when there is people in the land, then these people actually sold us the land. So, and you hear lots of Muslims repeating this Zionist propaganda across the world. You can see how new identities, new countries were now being created. And this is an image I took myself from the British Archive in London. And you can see here how they initially, in 1916, initially drew the lines, then deleted them. No, put the line here, and then eventually we come to a map like this, dividing the land. And this was meant to be the international zone. And when the British occupied it, they did not keep their word. This is also another letter from the British Archive. The meeting between Faisal and Haim Weizmann, and he talks about amazingly how he was honored to meet him and to offer him hospitality and so on and so forth. And you can see it also in the letter from them. This starting from 1917 with the British occupation and the proclamation of the world, the revolutions that took place. We talked about the renovations in the Masjid al-Aqsa, which Sheikh Hassan Qassam was against. And just to wrap up the discussion here, how he was against this, use this money instead of beautifying the mosque, use it to buy weapons to fight the occupation. The Barak uprising, at the end of it, a document was offered that was the condition was that no British should be in this in this commission, and the commission was, I'm trying to find the book, it's in the library here. The commission came to the conclusion that Palestine is, Al-Buraq Wall is solely, the western wall of al-Masjid al-Aqsa is solely a Muslim waqf property, and Jews have no right in it whatsoever, and it was accepted by the League of Nations. So today, the wall of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, al-Buraq wall, is, according to international law, is an Islamic property, an Islamic waqf. Jews have no right at it whatsoever. The killing during this revolution of someone like the three famous men, Jamjoom, Fuad Hijazi, and Atazir, and their last words is that the Muslims across the whole world needs to fight the occupation and know that the British are like foxes. They do not trust them. And the same was said by Izzuddin Qassam. And he said, whoever tries what has been tried, meaning negotiation with the occupiers, is a kha'in. And whoever tries to do this, his mind is messed up. 1948, you see the exodus of Palestinians, the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing, and you can see people running away with whatever they can gather and taking their keys, and they lived in refugee camps, just like Syrians are living in refugee camps, and then turning these camps into houses, into makeshift shelters for people to live in. This is the how Palestine, British Palestine, looked in 1946. You can see still the mainly Arab population across the whole of it, and you can see the UN partition plan, unfair, giving 55% of the land to the Zionists, and then you can see in 1948 they occupied 78% of the land, and what was left was only 22%, the West Bank and Gaza, and that was occupied in 1967. And today, these are the places where Palestinians are in green, and the rest, unfortunately, has been turned into Israel. In 1967, now coming to 1967, we're running out of time. 1967, you can see here al-Masjid al-Aqsa, al-Buraq wall here, and this is the Maghariba quarter, the Moroccan, the North African quarter, which was from the time of the Ayyubids after Salah ad-Din has become an Islamic waqf property with madrasas, with houses, and so on. The first thing that the Zionists did when they occupied Bayt al-Maqdis is to put their hand on al-Buraq wall, and immediately after they did that, they destroyed the Maghariba quarter to make way for Jewish worship at al-Buraq wall, and this was the first violation of the status quo. What Ben Gurion has said, and this is important for today's conflict to understand today, is he talks about, and he's secular, this is a secular Jew, he says there is no meaning to Israel without Jerusalem, and there is no meaning to Jerusalem without the temple. So the temple is used as something that they would like to push forward, that the temple is going to come down from the sky, and this is a difference between Christian Zionists and Jewish Zionists and different types of Jewish Zionists today. And what is happening this week in al-Masjid al-Aqsa is very, very problematic. So there is a lot that we need to bear in mind on this issue. Coming back to the occupation in 1967, on the 7th of June, the Israeli flag was raised over the Dome of the Rock. They celebrated the occupation. The Muslims fought in 1948, and they also fought after that in 1967. And the minaret, a spot minaret of al-Masjid al-Aqsa was heavily damaged because many of the Muslim fighters were still fighting, trying to stop the Zionists from entering in Masjid al-Aqsa. Eventually, they entered. They raised the Zionist flag over the Dome of the Rock. The military chaplain, and soon to be the chief rabbi, suggested that Al-Aqsa's Dome of the Rock should be destroyed with 100 kilograms of explosive TNT. And he said this to the generals, and the generals said they would not do this. And the reasons that they would not do this, I'm sure you can guess. This would raise the whole of the Muslim world against it. But they went in with their armed vehicles inside Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Moshe Dayan comes in and immediately agrees with the Jordanian Awqaf that these are pictures coming from Masjid al-Aqsa, and we see similar pictures today. You can see what happened in the Masjid al-Aqsa over the last few weeks. People dressed inappropriately inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. What Moshe Dayan does is he announces that inside the Masjid al-Aqsa will be run by the Jordanian Awqaf. Most of these people are secular. You see the religious rabbi, he wanted to change this, destroy it, and build the temple immediately. They said, no, so he issues the Protection of Holy Places Law in 1967. In accordance, accordingly, that inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa will be ruled by the Waqf, and the gates from outside and the entrance will be decided by the Israeli occupation forces. And Al-Buraq wall is lost. The gate of Maghariba, the key, will stay with them. And the chief rabbi at that time said that entry to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is actually forbidden according to the Torah. This is the fatwa that the chief rabbi at that time issued. And the fatwa still is today, that Jews are actually, according to the Torah, are not allowed to enter al-Masjid al-Aqsa until the building of the temple. So this is today a sign placed at the gate, the Maghariba gate of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. However, this sign has been recently removed. We talked about the destruction of the Maghariba quarter, completely wiped out, immediate confiscation of Al-Buraq wall, and you can see turning it into a place for their visitation into the Masjid al-Aqsa Mubarak. Now we see two different lines going forward. The Christian Zionists are adamant that, and there was a Christian prophecy from the United States saying that within 4 years of 1967, the temple is going to be built. This is by Christian Zionists. So this pushed someone, his name in our first class was on the day of the anniversary of the building, the burning of the Masjid al-Aqsa in 1969, a Christian Zionist by the name of Michael Dennis Rowan, Australian, comes and burns the Masjid al-Aqsa with the help of other Zionist Jews, and it burns the iconic gift of Nur ad-Din Zinki, which stayed in the Masjid al-Aqsa for 771 years. It burns it and makes major damage to the southern building of the Masjid al-Aqsa, a third of which was destroyed. So you can see here an important point, that Christian Zionists would want to force the hand of God, that we need to build the temple for the return of Jesus Christ. Jewish Zionists were, although we have the rabbi who suggested that, the majority of them believe that the temple is going to come down by divine decree. Now, in the last few decades, there are Jewish Zionists, religious Jewish Zionists, pushing this idea that we need to build the temple, and they've organized everything in that. Underneath the Masjid al-Aqsa, we have the tunnels that are weakening the foundation of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. In 1990, there's lots of events that took place, but I'm running through them very quickly to come to the modern period. The massacre inside Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, where tens of Muslims were killed in order to make access to the temple groups, to put the foundation stone inside the Masjid al-Aqsa. So al-Aqsa is always at the focal of everything. The opening of the tunnel in 1996 also instigated another uprising. Ariel Sharon entering the Masjid al-Aqsa in 2000 instigated the second intifada, where many Muslims were also massacred. Now what we have is a temporal division of the masjid. Jews enter al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Unfortunately, now it is even gone beyond what used to happen before. Mornings and afternoons are for Jews, and sometimes for the Muslims. Muslims are being harassed, and you can see in this image this soldier attacking these three elderly women just outside the gate of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. A woman, her hijab is being pulled off at the gate of the Masjid al-Aqsa. Muslims are not allowed to enter, while Zionist settlers are allowed to enter. But they were allowed to enter, and they're not allowed to conduct prayer. And if any of them would conduct prayer, they would be forced out of the Masjid al-Aqsa immediately. But now this is changing, particularly after the deal of the century. From 1967 till today, there has not been a single day without Zionists entering al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And you can see people like Sister Aida here, Aida Sidawi, who was attacked viciously last year by settlers with pepper spray. They tore her jilbab and attacked her. She stands together with other Morabitat against the occupiers to try. They're not allowed to enter Masjid al-Aqsa, and the settlers are inside, so they pray to the closest point outside the Masjid al-Aqsa, and you can see the Zionists going through the Maghariba gate, and now they would like to change this and to enter from different gates of the Masjid al-Aqsa. But you can see armed soldiers, if this would happen anywhere else in the world, armed soldiers in one of Islam's holiest places, and they would use tear gas, they would use rubber bullets, they would use live ammunitions, they would use everything inside the Masjid al-Aqsa. And there's a story that I've witnessed in my eyes 8 years ago in the Masjid al-Aqsa that made me feel that this ummah does not exist. This ummah, when a Muslim woman is attacked inside the Masjid al-Aqsa while reading the Quran by a Zionist soldier, he would bite her with his teeth like a vicious dog, and allowed to stand there and laugh at the Muslims while they try to defend her and unable to do anything. With thousands of soldiers inside the Masjid al-Aqsa on a daily basis is something that you can see in this picture. It tells a lot. Tens of soldiers trying to arrest one single Muslim woman. And this does not just happen to Muslim holy sites, also to Christian holy places. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest place to Christians, was closed because of the Zionist action. Also attacks on churches. You can see trying to burn churches. You can see in the image here on the right. And when the Pope came and he came to this separation wall. What Israel is trying to do inside the Masjid al-Aqsa is apply what they have achieved inside the Mosque of Ibrahim, Prophet Ibrahim, in al-Masjid al-Ibrahimi in Al-Khalid, my city in Hebron. When a Zionist fanatic settler, Jewish settler in 1994 comes inside the Masjid al-Ibrahimi during the month of Ramadan, if you recall, it was February. This man comes, shoots people in the month of Ramadan, in the Fajr prayer, while they are fasting, while they are in their sujood. He shoots them from their backs and he kills tens of people. The Masjid al-Ibrahim was closed for 6 months, and when it was reopened,
60% of the mosque was turned into a synagogue. Muslims do not have access to that. And this is what the discussion in the Israeli Knesset, their parliament, took place, is to apply the same thing inside the Masjid al-Aqsa, where parts of the Masjid al-Aqsa would be dedicated for Jewish prayer, and parts will be for Muslims. So besides the division in time to divide the mosque by space, where a site of inside the Masjid al-Aqsa, particularly around there was many attempts. Well, the first attempt was to take the Marwani basement, and this failed because of Sheikh al-Salah and the others who opened this for Muslim prayer, because since 1967 it was closed. So they opened it, and the Al-Aqsa al-Qadim, the old basement underneath al-Jami al-Aqsa, was also reopened for Muslim worship. Now they started looking at the area of Bab al-Rahma, and just 2 days ago you saw Yehuda Glick, a rabbi, blowing the shofar in over the graves of the Sahaba just outside the Masjid al-Aqsa, here where two of the great Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ are buried. Attack are not just on the living but also on the dead, and you saw images of the woman trying to stop the destruction of her son's grave. Even the dead are not safe from this. But now, more dangerous than all of what I've discussed in the terms of the occupation of the land, that can all be reversed, but the occupation of the mind is more dangerous. And what we have today are Muslim Zionists, or Arab, sorry, we can't say Muslim Zionists, because a Muslim cannot be a Zionist. And at the same time, by the way, a Muslim cannot be an anti-Semitic. A Muslim is anti-Zionist. However, today we have Turkish, Arab, and other Pakistani and other quote-unquote Muslim Zionists who are promoting the Zionist propaganda. So from, if you recall, 1948 war, behind the army, there was another brigade following the army, and this was documented by an Israeli academic who wrote a book on stealing books. It was his PhD thesis. And what happened is, following the army, there was a brigade, an armed brigade, that would go into the Palestinian cities and villages and steal the books. Most of the Israeli National Library books have been stolen from Palestinian homes. So, and this was not just to steal the books and to enrich the library, but it was to create a new narrative, the Zionist narrative on the history. And this is, unfortunately, until today, the most popular narrative across the world, that the Zionists have pushed this narrative forward. And this narrative is what most people, unfortunately, subscribe to. You go to universities from Malaysia all the way to South Africa and other places, and even the West, you'll find that most of the sources are giving the Zionist narrative on the occupation, or what they call the independence of the state of Israel. But this takes a new dimension, and I will give you two examples. The first is this man you see on the top. His name is Professor Mordechai Kedar, a Zionist academic who regularly appears on Al Jazeera TV, unfortunately. So this man made a video. You can find it online in Arabic. He speaks Arabic, and he says the reason Al-Quds is never mentioned in the Quran, number one. Number two, the importance of Jerusalem to Muslims is only a political importance during the Umayyad, because of the fighting between Abdul Malik and Abdullah ibn Zubair, and the building of the Dome of the Rock happened because of that. So he blows all of this up. He misquotes people like al-Waqidi, and he says the Prophet never came to Masjid al-Aqsa in Palestine. He actually went to Jairana, next to Mecca, on the way to Ta'if, and he puts this claim forward. This, okay, you might say most Muslims would not accept this. They would not accept this from a Zionist. But, and listen to this. The man on the left bottom left-hand side, Yusuf Zidan, is an Arab Zionist. He's an Egyptian, a very famous author, and he has been instructed, as has been leaked in a tape, and you find it on YouTube. He was ordered by the current president of Egypt, Sisi, to undermine the importance of Al Masjid Al Aqsa in Palestine to Egyptians. So he comes on national TV and he says exactly, he quotes Mordechai Kedar without quoting him directly, but he says exactly the same argument without even adding anything into the argument, without double checking the argument, without anything. So he comes on TV and he says, Al Aqsa is not in Palestine, Al Aqsa is next to Mecca, Al Aqsa is this, it's not. And then he starts attacking figures like Salah ad-Din to try to undermine these important figures in the Muslim mind. This is one example. The second example is by one of the prime ministers of Israel, Ehud Olmert, when he was the mayor of the municipality of Jerusalem. During his time, he took most of the research done by Zionist Israeli scholars and he translates it into Arabic, which undermines the importance of Al-Aqsa. And he puts in that argument that he translates it and gives it free of charge to the people in the city. The reason for doing this is to try to undermine the importance of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in the minds of those who are defending Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in the city. And this is the most dangerous thing, is to try to rewrite history and to rewrite the importance of this place in the Muslim mind. So this is extremely difficult of what has happened in the mind of people today, and we can see this apartheid state and how it is functioning, similar to what has happened in South Africa. The dangers in Masjid Al-Aqsa face, and this is the end that we will try to come to, is the idea that a temple needs to be built on the site of the Masjid Al-Aqsa, and there are many different ideas that are being presented. There's different, as one academic says, if you ask 100 archaeologists or biblical scholars on the site of the temple, you'll get 101 answers. They do not know what the temple was or where it was, and most of this is based on the rewritten Torah that was rewritten in the Babylon period. But there's lots of problems with that, and let's not get into that. The foundations of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, you saw falling of foundation stones, ancient stones in the basement of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. There's cracks in the walls. There was a tree that just fell just a few days ago. But the worst thing that has happened to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is the occupation. And you saw the resilience of the Palestinians against this occupation. Every day they are paying with their blood and sweat at the gates of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And you saw in 2017, when Masjid Al-Aqsa was sealed for 2 full weeks, the people there came to the closest point in their tens of thousands until Israel removed these barriers and reopened Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa without any conditions you saw. But this does not mean that this is the end. The Prophet ﷺ has told us that the future is Al-Aqsa is not just going to be liberated, but Al-Aqsa will become the center of the future Khilafah of Islam, which we have discussed a few times. And this is a beautiful hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he says, the prophethood shall be with you as long as Allah wills it to be, then Allah will lift it whenever He wishes. Then it will be a Khilafah on the way of the prophethood, and Allah will let it last as long as Allah wishes, and then Allah will lift it when He wishes to lift it. Then it will be mulkan addan, from father to son, which happened from the time of the companion Muawiyah all the way till the end of the Ottoman period, and the period before that was from Abu Bakr to Al-Hassan, and after that we see from father to son. Then Allah will lift it whenever He wishes to lift it, and this has ended. Then He says, then it shall be mulkan jabriyan, you shall be ruled by force. And Allah will let this continue as long as He wishes. Then Allah will lift it whenever He wishes to lift it. And this is what we are living through today. So we've seen the prophethood, we've seen the Khilafah Rashida, we've seen the Sultanate from father to son, and then we have seen the to be ruled by rulers that people do not want. And now, next stage, the Prophet ﷺ says, ثم تكون خلافة على منهاج النبوة ثم سكت. Then it shall return to a khilafah on the way of the prophethood, and then the Prophet was silent. What we see is the Muslims are shying away from talking about these things, but then we see the Zionists, the Christian Zionists, and Jewish Zionists are not shying away, and we see what happened in the deal of the century, which is very dangerous on al-Masjid al-Aqsa. But when Donald Trump talked about Jerusalem, united Jerusalem shall be the eternal capital, not of Israel, but of the Jewish people. He's setting the mark so high. And then when the Muslim leaders met in Istanbul, and only 14 out of 56 of them actually turned up, some of them sent their driver or their secretary or whoever they sent, pathetic. And then the outcome of this meeting is that Eastern Jerusalem shall be the future capital of a future Palestine. You see where they're headed, Donald Trump and the Zionists are setting the bar, and we are so far down in the response, and unfortunately. And what we see with Trump's policy on this, what he has decided on the creation of moving the embassy, and then on the issue of the Masjid al-Aqsa is extremely dangerous. This is the work of one of my students who is writing her thesis on this subject. But after moving the embassy, which we talked about, one of the things that was being discussed in this is that Al-Masjid al-Aqsa shall be open to followers of all religions for worship. This is extremely dangerous for Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, that it will be open for them during their times of worship, and they shall conduct their prayers. This is moving towards something different, which is the not just the temporal division by time, but spatial division of the Masjid al-Aqsa, that during Jewish holidays, this is also the policy that is being followed by by Biden. But before that, what you saw with what was happening under Donald Trump, this gave the Zionists a push towards pushing this. Before this deal of the century, Jewish prayer in the Masjid al-Aqsa was unaccepted. Silent prayer maybe possible, but now loud prayers, and what Al-Aqsa is going to face over the next 2 weeks is extremely dangerous. It will set a new mark for what will happen inside Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa Al-Mubarak in preparation for the building of a Zionist temple over the site of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa Al-Mubarak. Extremely dangerous days that Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is going through, and if this ummah does not work together, then we are in a very, very difficult position. The defending Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is not the role of the Palestinians, it is the role of all the Muslims, and it is the role to defend Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in every possible way, inshallah. I don't want to end with a negative note, because the people inside the Masjid al-Aqsa are fighting with everything that they are doing. But let's take your questions. Please, if you have written your questions before, please write them again. Copy and paste your questions. These olive, I have, some of you were asking me about this yesterday, but on Friday, I received these olive branches from Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. A sister was there, and also we had a group of students. They finished a course on writing stories for um, children on al-Masjid al-Aqsa. So 20 of them, they just finished this, and this was their gift, a pen, together with the concept of resistance. So you can see um, this as something that we can continue on, inshallah azza wa jal. Okay, so let's see the questions, and Bismillah. Uh, what is the first question that we can start with? The first question is regarding Sultan Abdul Hamid. Um, the letter that why he was dethroned. Let's see if I can get the actual letter. Uh, Bismillah, so I can share it with you and you can also see it. The letter, he says clearly in the letter that the reason that he was dethroned is the not giving Bayt al-Maqdis as a land for the for for the Jews. Um, it's not opening up. My apologies. If I get it, then I will share it with you. Let's move to the second question. One more try. I'll have a look. Hopefully, I can find it in this slide. No, unfortunately not. Okay, you can find it in online, or there are some published articles that discuss this, or in the lectures from last step by step Bayt al-Maqdis, which we discussed the issue in more okay. So question one. There is no reliable organization that we can for the future. How can we proceed from there? There is good in this ummah. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-khayru fiyya wa fi ummati ila yawm al-qiyamah." There is good in my ummah until the day of judgment. So do not despair. Do not think that it is not possible to achieve what we want to achieve. What we need to get to is get away from divisions. We learn from the example of many people didn't trust, by the way, Salah ad-Din until he liberated Bayt al-Maqdis. So don't think that even during that time things were rosy and beautiful. It took a long time before things actually managed to bear fruits. So we need to continue learning from the examples, try to unite ourselves behind this direction. We can learn this clearly from Salah ad-Din and what he has managed to achieve through this particular issue. I found the letter. Let me share it with you so you can see it. Let's make it a bit bigger. And you can see here in the text that you see here on the left-hand side, written by Sultan Abdul Hamid, in which he starts with Alhamdulillah and thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how he was dethroned, and he talks about the Khilafah al-Islamiyya, and he talks about the young Turks, and what they were trying to do. And then he talks here clearly that Aradi Muqaddasa, the Philistine there, the Holy Land, and Palestine, he would not give as uygun bir vatan kavmi tesisine kabul ve tasdik etmek uygun ısrarla. He did not give it to be a land for a homeland, a reasonable homeland for the Jews. So this letter clearly says that in the writing of Sultan Abdul Hamid, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on his soul. Okay, let's continue with the questions. Are Zionists, Jewish Zionists, looking towards Christian Zionists for building the temple? No, now Jewish Zionists have evolved. Still, the majority of Jews are waiting for the temple to come down from the sky. So they believe God is going to create, to bring down the temple. However, these reformist Zionists, and there are now a lot of organizations, and they're the ones pushing for intrusions into al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and they're the ones now, they've prepared the stones, the clothes, even there's a red heifer, a cow, everything is ready for the building of the temples. Is there memoirs of Sultan Abdul Hamid we can read in English? Actually, his daughter has written memoirs, so you can relate to that. Would you kindly mention Abdulaziz Rantisi? May Allah have mercy on him. He was one of the Palestinian resistance leaders who fought against the Zionists, and he said something. He fought against the Zionists. He was expelled to southern Lebanon, returned to Palestine, continued the resistance, and he says, as a doctor, either I see people die every day, and either you can die on your bed, on hospital bed, or you can die by an Israeli weapon, and I prefer to become a martyr by the Israeli Apache. Yes, the slingshots with a twist. It's also a pen, so it's both together. You mentioned that Al-Aqsa was divided a synagogue and a masjid. Did you say today parts of underneath the western tunnel of the Masjid Al-Aqsa there is a synagogue, but they would like to have large section, a third of the Masjid Al-Aqsa turned into a synagogue. But still they haven't succeeded in doing that. And if the Muslims stay silent, then this would become a reality, like it became a reality in the Mosque of Abraham, which was closed last. We discussed it also a few weeks back. During Friday prayers, it was sealed off for Muslims because it coincided with Jewish holidays. Rabia, those countries that have resumed ties with Israel, a disaster, but at the same time, including anyone who normalizes relation with Israel, this is a blow to the issue of al-Masjid al-Aqsa and to Palestine and to Palestinians and to Jerusalemites. There is no excuse. Whoever does it, whether he's Arab, whether he's Turk, whoever does that, this is completely unacceptable and is an attack on that. And this is how the people around al-Masjid al-Aqsa see it. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us a hadith that لا تزال طائفة من أمتي على الحق. There's a group of my ummah always on the right, and they are always fighting. They will overcome their enemy until the fate of Allah will come, and they shall always be patient. They said, Ya Rasulullah, where are they? He said, in Bayt al-Maqdis and around Bayt al-Maqdis. So the people in the region of the Holy Land, the people around it in Gaza, in Syria, in Egypt, and particularly the people around the Masjid al-Aqsa, see where you are from them. If they are on the right path, the Rasulullah has said. So if they tell you this is wrong, and they say normalizing with the Zionists does not gain you anything, and what United Arab Emirates, what Sudan, what Morocco, what Saudi is about to do, what Egypt and Jordan and Turkey are doing is completely unacceptable in this regard. And Indonesia is down the line, and other Arab countries and other Muslim countries are also unfortunately going through this. But however, bear in mind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يَمِيزَ اللَّهُ الْخَبِيثَ مِنَ الطَّيِّبِ, until Allah separates good from bad. And sometimes you might think that this is not good, but this is something very, very dangerous. Fatima, who was the Queen of Arabia, the Queen of the Desert, was Gertrude Bell. You can see the film about her, but the film is Hollywood. It's presenting her in a good light. But read about her, read her memoirs, read what this woman set Churchill when he was about to draw the lines of many of the states like northern Iraq. He said, no one touches their pens until Gertrude comes. She was an expert in the region. She sat with all the tribal leaders. She went across, and she is one of the reasons why there is no Kurdistan today, is because she was against the Kurds having a state for particular reasons. That's not the place to discuss. What is being done to the rest of control? Can you please repeat the question, Bob? It's not clear. Banu, I cannot see, I cannot go back further. So my apologies. The current plan, vision, strategy to free Palestine. Unfortunately, there is no plan amongst the Muslims to do this. And even the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, its leader Khalid a while back made a comment that there is really no strategy for this. And unfortunately, that's very sad. And if we follow a strategy based on the prophetic roadmap and Salahuddin, how he liberated, there's a lot we can learn. Knowledge is the starting point that we need to take forward. Political, economic, military pressures like the West, NATO. No, unfortunately, Arab countries are not going to do this. Arab countries are exactly doing the opposite. They're, instead of putting pressure on Israel, they're normalizing with Israel. So do not expect anything from governments. The only thing that can change is movement from the ground, from the people on the ground. And this is you. These are the people, like what happened in South Africa. The world was against apartheid. The people boycotted. The people did everything we talked about, a plan. Each one has to have a road plan. Do not belittle yourself. Every little helps. Every little that you do will eventually lead to this. And we talked about education being the basis for all of this. And we talked about spiritual, religious, political connection, plus economic, plus also the gift. And there is a lot more we can learn from the example of Salahuddin on the unity of the Muslims. But individual action does not pay off. This needs to become a massive movement in the Muslim world towards the Masjid al-Aqsa. Then things will start to change. That being kept up. Please put the question again. More on the Islamic educational system. That's a long discussion. And we're running out of time in our last lecture. My apologies. There's hopefully we can have more discussions on this, if you like, in the full 1 year program. Name any Zionist from Pakistan. I cannot think of a name just now. But what I was talking about, Arab Zionists, we have, I mentioned to you, Yusuf Zidan in Saudi Arabia, in Uqab newspaper. The same argument was published on Kuwaiti National, on Kuwaiti Watan TV. The same was being said in Turkey, and I hope Pakistan on this issue stays strong, and we do not have, at least they are not visible. Can those countries who have started relation for the violence Palestinians have to suffer daily? You saw actually just 2 days ago, yesterday, the day before, these Arab countries that are normalizing, like Morocco and United Arab Emirates, were present at an Israeli military show, showing how they would attack a Palestinian. So they're not going to speak with Israel about stopping violence, although some claim that they are doing this, but this is not something that possible. Yes, Bob, Burhanuddin, dua is number one in our roadmap that we have agreed on. I have found many of our leaders being negative to the proposal of the establishment of Khilafah, asking the reason the concept of Khilafah has become a dogma amongst the Muslims. Muslims have Islamophobia. Muslims have Islamophobia. This is how bad the Muslims have become. Muslims fear the concept of jihad, fear the concept of Sharia, fear the concept of Khilafah, fear the concept. These are Islamic concepts ingrained in the heart of Islam. And you see actually in all juristical books that Khilafah is an essential part. And when Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, when the Prophet ﷺ died, even before burying the Prophet ﷺ, immediately establishing a Khalif was important. But Khilafah has also been discolored by groups like Daesh, ISIS, and others who have portrayed, gave unfortunately, a concept of Khilafah that fits in with that stereotype. I once watched on Jewish TV writer claiming that the last target, Moses, was not Palestine. He was claiming Mecca, the center. Have you ever heard of this? There are some claims that the Holy Land is not in Palestine, but these are generally not accepted. Even Islamically, or even an Arab nationalist try to push this idea forward. Some of them argue this, but it's not the general accepted understanding. MashaAllah, we have lots of questions, and I want to wrap up in 10 minutes. So let me try to run as much as we can. I live in London, but want to do an accreditation course with possible organized visits to Al-Aqsa. Can you recommend course online if you know any university in London? We have, thank you, Nazbin, for bringing this up. Actually, let me bring up the program that we will be running on Bayt al-Maqdis. Let me see if I'm able to share the screen with you. I need to connect here and then try. Just give me 1 second. My apologies. Going to be run with Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, in association with the University, Social Sciences University of Ankara. Is going to be a course that is going to be running September next year. The course is aimed at establishing, following up where we have left off here. So the idea of this course is going to be developing on where we have stopped and how we can continue from there. I hope you are able to see my screen or not yet. Give me 1 second to share the screen. So the details of the course I will share with you. You'll find the information on isra.org.uk in a few days. This will be announced. So you can see here the certificate in Islamic Jerusalem Studies. It will be given by a number of scholars over 1 year period. There will be 5 courses: Bayt al-Maqdis in the Quran and Hadith, Bayt al-Maqdis between occupation and liberation, Al-Aqsa Mosque, the place and significance, the current occupation of Bayt al-Maqdis, and a project each one will do. These are some of the lectures that we'll be teaching from Malaysia, from Palestine, from Masjid al-Aqsa, from Turkey, from Qatar, and other places. The classes, each semester there will be 2 courses that will run, and the details and the payments and the dates and so on you will find on this website, and you can make your application through that. This I have just seen the details of it, but you will see we can access it through isra.org.uk from next week. The details will be shared on that site inshallah. Okay, Back to the questions. How far did we go? Uh, Please elaborate. I have found many of our relatives being negative. We've answered that. Yes, we just went through this. So there is also a master program in English at the University of Social Sciences, University of Ankara, and there's also a master's and PhD in UUM in Malaysia, University of Utara, Malaysia, and a new center also in Arabic and in Turkish in Mardin University. And these are the places in the world where Bayt al-Maqdis studies is being offered at the moment. A new center has just been opened in Indonesia and maybe another one also in Malaysia. Thank you, Fahima. Before the Ottoman collapse, there was not clear. Yes, yes, yes. That's true. There was these boundaries were not in that same form. Actually, what existed at the end of the Ottoman period was a different administrative division, and the administrative divisions change with time. And what we saw at the end of the Ottoman period, and we see maps of this, there was what was known as Qudus Sharif Mutasarrif. So this was a province, the independent province of Quds Sharif, that is directly linked to Istanbul. So normally it would be linked to Damascus, which will be a sub-province under it. But before Sultan Abdul Hamid, it was made into a province directly linked to the capital of the Khilafah. The reason why that happened is that it is connected directly. So these interventions of and the penetration of the Westerners would not take place, or to try to limit it as much as possible. And there were some maps that we have shown showing some of this and how this has actually changed with time, and how this then becomes what it is during the British. And when the British drew the maps, actually they were to fit in with the biblical narrative, which is extremely important, how they played with to try to include parts in northern Palestine. Today, northern Palestine, they were part of Lebanon or Syria. They were re-included so that it fits with the biblical boundaries from Dan to Beersheba. So they extended the boundaries to include that within this particular region. Okay, let's move to the next question. Is there any mention of Jewish ideology in the Quran Hadith? A lot. The Quran talks about Bani Israel a lot. And the reason why the Quran talks about this is to make Muslims aware of this and to try not to make also the same mistakes. Yes, this book about Sultan Abdul Hamid actually has been published a while back. And there's some recent, even at the university I'm in, and other places, there are studies on the time of Sultan Abdul Hamid. In pushing the uprising, the role of Gaza is extremely important. As Rasulullah says, it is in Aknaf Bayt al-Maqdis, and Gaza's role in the last war was extremely important in the protection of the Masjid al-Aqsa. Gaza being involved when the people in al-Masjid al-Aqsa called upon the people of Gaza to support them, then they came and gave Israel an ultimatum to leave al-Masjid al-Aqsa and to end the eviction of Palestinian homes in Sheikh Jarrah. And when this didn't take place, then the people of Gaza put their lives on the line. How does the excavation take? Yes, from 1967, they've been digging underneath al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and recently, just a few days ago, a video has been released of the actual digging taking place underneath al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and some of it actually does weaken the foundation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Of what benefit is to the Western world still support Jewish Zionism? The state of Israel is an outpost of the Western world. in order to control the region, they have a powerful tool that they are using together with the Arab leaders that fit perfectly with what they have done. Why can't get one Arab country at least to navigate sanctions against Israel? Because all of them have military might. They don't really have military might, Soraya. Most of the weapons they get from the West, and it is not something that they will be able to use against Israel in any way. And most of the Arab states are under the Western control, and Donald Trump made it very clear. And he was very honest when he said, I called King Salman and I said, 2 weeks. If we don't support you, you'll fall. Then he made it 2 days, and then he made it 2 hours, and he's laughing about it with his constituents. That's how pathetic the Arab leaders are, to be mocked in this way, and very unfortunate. You mentioned in the beginning of the lecture that is there Arabic, Bayt al-Maqdis step by step. Yes, Arabic. Also, the diploma, the 1 year program, has been running for 10 years in Arabic. And anyone would like to join that also through ISRA's website, all of which is going to be announced next week, inshallah. So registration will end on the 17th of October, on the 7th of October. So 3 weeks from now, 1 month from now, teaching will start on this 1 year program in English and in Arabic. The sister has been, yes, thank you. Sister Fatima bint Ali has been doing excellent notes. I would like to thank her on your behalf, and I'm sure that they will be shared again in the WhatsApp group and in the others. Thank you to Sister Fatima bint Ali for doing wonderful notes on the classes that we have done. Was the territory of Palestine before it became British Palestine. It was named Qudus Sharif, the independent province of Al-Quds Sharif, and it used to be much bigger than Palestine today. It included Sinai, for example. Let me see if I can find the map and show you the map of this, because this is quite important. I did a study of the boundaries of Bayt al-Maqdis during the administrative boundaries of Bayt al-Maqdis during the time of Sultan Abdul Hamid, and I was quite impressed with the maps that were being designed and drawn out at that time. The western side of the map that extended to Egypt was something that Sultan Abdul Hamid was fighting against the British in extending these maps and extending the land in that direction. I'm not finding the map, but I'll see if I manage to get it while we are answering the questions. At the same time, I will share it with you, inshallah, so you are able to see the map. Unfortunately, it's not coming up, but in one of the first classes we did share it. Yes, he is, and Israeli newspapers, Nazir, have exposed many of secret meetings that have taken place between MBS and the Netanyahu and other Zionist leaders, and he's fearing a backlash of Saudis if he normalizes with Israel. So they're working on normalizing the things on TV and in the public, that supporting Palestinians is useless. We've supported them for such a long time. This is the current rhetoric on Saudi TV, unfortunately. Yes, if someone can help, Farheen, if you please send me an email. We have a project which is one of the co-organizers of this group, of this series of lectures, I Love Al-Aqsa, which is going to launch soon with animations and lots of information on Masjid Al-Aqsa. And the Urdu translation has been done, but it needs to be checked by someone who is grounded in Urdu and in Islamic studies. So if someone can help with this, that will be great, or any other language, anyone who can help in any translating information on Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa to reach all the Muslims in all their languages, please send me an email. And the email was shown at the beginning of the lecture. Yes, unfortunately, Turkey is changing its stance. It's normalizing relations with the Zionists, and you saw the welcome of the Zionist president, the welcome he got in Ankara, and the people in Turkey were not happy with this, but Turkey is trying to, at the current state that it's in, is trying to cut back its problems with its neighbors, and one of them is unfortunately normalizing relations with Israel. What should we do if all Muslim countries agree with normalization? You need to stand up and let your voice be heard. When the Zionist president came to Ankara, the people were not happy. The people petitioned the government. The people spoke against it. The Israeli flags that were raised in the streets, people went up and took these flags down. Do not, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, if you see wrong, then change it with your hand. If you cannot, then change it with your tongue. If you cannot, then change it with your heart. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. That is the weakest form of Iman. You should never accept this. What if the Zionists' biggest threat today? What is that? We saw with what happened Kashmiri at the time of Salah ad-Din. The biggest fear of the Crusaders was a Muslim that would unite the two realms of Islam, Cairo and Damascus. And when things were changing in Damascus and in Egypt, in Cairo, the Zionists paid everything to make sure that this would not succeed. Just give me 1 second to put the lights on. It is getting dark. So their biggest fear is Muslim unity to fight the Zionists. What other ways can they be weakened? We need to understand Jewish society. There, Allah says in the Quran very clearly, تحسبهم جميعا وقلوبهم شتى. You think they're one, but their hearts are so divided. The Israeli society would collapse from inside, and they know how to make Muslim societies collapse from inside, but we don't have sufficient strategies to work on this issue. Or is it only through raising awareness? We need to do that amongst Muslims, and we need to have strategies for working with them. All of this is something that the Muslim Ummah needs to work together on. Bismillah. Yes, thank you very much, Fatima. But it is much more needs to be done from Pakistan on the issue of the Masjid Al-Aqsa to make it a local issue in Pakistan. That the Masjid Al-Aqsa is not just an international issue, it's a local issue for people in Pakistan. Jazakumullah khair for the work that you do, Fatima, in Pakistan. May Allah give the people in South Africa, they have load shedding, which they have electrical blackouts like in Gaza. It's the rulers who may support Zionism. Yes, the people will never do. And the Americans have been pushing Pakistani government to normalize with Israel. And I heard from a Pakistani diplomat that this is not going to happen. But you never know. Even Kuwait has been pressured to normalize with Israel. And Kuwait said, we will be the last country that will normalize. So eventually, they're all inevitable that they're all going to do it. But Allah musta'an. Some exchange program where Muslims travel to Muslim countries, that the issue of unity is a big thing that the Muslims need to. Salah ad-Din did this by getting the Muslims to focus on one issue. Nur ad-Din, not Salah ad-Din starting with Nur ad-Din. This is the issue that all the Muslims can agree on. why two mu'mins will not disagree on this issue. Make this the issue that will be shareable. The details you will check on www.isra.org.uk from next week, inshallah. I'm sorry, how can we connect to this course? Yes, please go through the website that I mentioned, and then we can, that will be a start, inshallah. Yes. There's a British man of Pakistani origin. We don't need to remember his name, Mushtaq. He calls himself a Muslim Zionist, and he supports the atrocities. He goes with the Israeli army, and he uh, talks about peace in Israel. Nonsense. You know, people like that, unfortunately, exist. Um, Even media, yes, this is what your role is. Education, we need to push this forward with across the whole board. It is something that needs to be taught in madrasas. This is something needs to be taught in schools, in universities. Al-Aqsa needs to be in every household in across Pakistan and across the Muslim world. Jazakumullah khair. It's a pleasure. I'm checking the details here. If there's any question, there's a Turkish historical drama. Yes, it is. It even discusses this Gertrude Bell, and it does discuss these tricks that the British and the others have been doing. The master program is not online. The master program is face to face, so it's available in Turkey, in Ankara, and in Mardin, and in Malaysia. The program in English is only the taught program in English is only in Social Sciences University of Ankara, in face to face. The largest Muslim country to spread knowledge. There is a lot that needs to be done, excuse me, in Indonesia, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh. These are the biggest Muslim countries. In India, the biggest Muslim countries in the world. And this is something that education and getting different organizations to work together. There were many training sessions that took place in Indonesia, Bayt al-Maqdis Peace Camp 1 and 2 with Sahabat al-Aqsa and other organizations that have joined in, and I was lucky to be part of that. Currently, there's been a 2-month tour of the founder of the field of Islamic Jerusalem Studies, Professor Abdul Fattah, in Malaysia. So he's traveling, training the trainers on Bayt al-Maqdis. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you for your kind words. May Allah reward you all for your kind words. I'll skip them. Most of these Muslim countries are not interested. The rulers are being controlled by the West. So these rulers are in that position. What happened in the Arab Spring of trying to change these rulers, Israel saw as a threat to itself. So that's why they supported the anti-revolution movement and brought people like Sisi in Egypt. With Syria, the leaked WikiLeaks showed that the United States is willing to keep Assad in his place until they get someone better who can serve Israel. So it's quite unfortunate to do that. The lecture notes, as far as I know, are available on the WhatsApp group, and also the link was shared on last week's lecture. So if you check the and ask Sister Fatima to share them again after the lecture, check the comments. Hopefully, you can see the comments there, inshallah. Yes, Queen Elizabeth II, her reign and her state is the one that established the Zionist state, and they've created lots of atrocities as the British Empire across the world, unfortunately. Uh, Maybe I'm reaching, but Turkey's stance changed very soon after Foreign Minister of UAE visited. Yes, Turkey's position has changed a lot, unfortunately. I would be honored to do any other program with any organization in any of the countries. Alhamdulillah, recently I was in South Africa and we had two wonderful 2 weeks across the country talking about Bayt al-Maqdis. May Allah reward the brothers, the ulama, there for organizing that wonderful program. Uh, I'm trying to wrap up, but the questions keep coming in. Let me just share my email one more time, and then we will bring this to a close, inshallah ta'ala. We've been running for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I thought we'll finish in half an hour the rest of the questions, but this is still continuing. The email, you can see it here. Let me zoom in so you can see it clearly, inshallah. Okay. I hope you are able to see the email. What can a Muslim do on his individual capacity? We talked about each one needs to prepare their own roadmap for the liberation of Bayt al-Maqdis, and it has to be individual. And we talked about 5 points. And please plan and have this organized and do this as we have agreed. Thank you, Mazbin Dua, spiritually, educational, political, boycott, and prepare your gift for the liberation of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Yes, time for the assignment. To talk about the assignment, the final assignment that you'll be requested to do is based on what we have learned so far. And the details were meant to be sent to me, and so I can mention them to you. Last time there was other things that you needed to watch and to give comments on, but this time I think we can stick with your roadmap for the liberation of Bayt al-Maqdis. I think that each one, about a page to 2 pages, your roadmap for the liberation, your personal roadmap for the liberation of Bayt al-Maqdis based on the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the example of Salah ad-Din. How can you develop in your personal capacity, in your community, and in the wider circles that you are around, how you can do this. Let me repeat again. Your personal roadmap for the liberation of Bayt al-Maqdis is your final assignment based on what we have learned from. So you have to justify it based on the examples from the time of the Prophet, from the time of Salah ad-Din, and from the context that we have discussed today. How can you put a roadmap, personal roadmap for yourself, for your family, and for your wider community based on the examples that we have done? We've gone down a few people, so let me finish here. Jazakumullah khair for attending these 6 lectures. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you also abundantly for being part of this. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that some of you can continue on this path, inshallah azza wa jal. Yes, the 1 year diploma program in English and Arabic is online, and we hope that many of you, this was a teaser for that program. Um, so please um, uh, take, if you are able to take this online course for 1 year, 2 courses per semester. So it means 2 lectures a year. Sorry, 2 lectures a week for 12 weeks. And you will learn more in-depth knowledge of what we have covered. What we've done in this course is we've run through the history of Bayt al-Maqdis in 6 weeks, and what it needs is much more, a lot more actually. And in the courses that we discussed, is going to be discussing more in detail for each of them. If you are able to join, that will be great, inshallah azza wa jal. For the assignments, you have 1 week from today, and I'm sure uh, Amr and Hamza will follow you up in the WhatsApp group. So 1 week from today, so today is the 18th of September, by the 25th of September, to have submitted your assignment by the 25th of September, inshallah, azza wa jal. So 25th of September is the deadline for the assignment. The assignment is for you to, in 1 or 2 pages, to discuss your personal roadmap for the liberation, the future, the third liberation of Bayt al-Maqdis, for the future liberation of Bayt al-Maqdis, based on the example of the Prophet, the example of Salah ad-Din, and the context in which we are living today, for both your community and the people around you, inshallah azza wa jal. The details for submitting will be sent on the WhatsApp group. Last time things were sent by email, so I guess an email will be shared with you for you to be able to submit that. Jazakumullah khair. We've covered, as a concluding remark, Jazakumullah khair. Your questions have been wonderful. Your engagement has been incredible. In the last 6 weeks, we have covered the history of Bayt al-Maqdis, over 10,000 years, the past, the present, and we touched briefly today on the future. The future is bright. The future is Bayt al-Maqdis. The future of this ummah starts from Bayt al-Maqdis again. This ummah received the flag of the leadership of humanity in al-Masjid al-Aqsa during the night journey, and this ummah will raise again from al-Masjid al-Aqsa. It is the thermometer of this ummah, and we need to bear in mind that Al-Aqsa is not a Palestinian issue. Al-Aqsa is your issue. It's an international issue of all Muslims, an international issue for all those who have a sense of humanity in their heart. Wherever you say injustice, Bayt al-Maqdis is at the center of all of this. The rise of the Muslim Ummah starts again from al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and it will be the second rise of this Ummah, inshallah azza wa jal. Jazakumullah khair for engaging in the discussion and for your wonderful questions. And my apologies if there's anything that we have skipped or we didn't cover in detail, but this is where I invite you to join the diploma, 1 year diploma program on the Bayt al-Maqdis, the certificate in Bayt al-Maqdis studies that will start in the mid of October, but registration will end on the 7th of October. Details you will find on www.isra.org.uk from next week, inshallah. In a few days' time, the details of the diploma program you will find on this website. Jazakumullah khair al-jaza. Barakallah feekum. It's been an honor having people from across all continents joining this course. and for you persisting to follow this. For those who have joined us late, they will have another form to fill in with questions from the lectures. If they get 60% of the answers right, they will count as they have attended the lectures. But I recommend that you can go back to the lectures again and watch them, and hopefully learn something new. And if you would like to progress further in this, do the diploma course or do the master or PhD in Bayt al-Maqdis studies. We are in need for Muslims across the world to take part in this educational endeavor. Our motto is knowledge drives change, freedom, and the liberation of Bayt al-Maqdis. Jazakumullah khair, until we meet again, inshallah, in the liberated Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa Al-Mubarak. Jazakumullah khair, barakallah fikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.